Right. So we're now recording. So good morning to you, or afternoon, whatever time of day it is when you're watching this. I'd like to welcome you along to our intermediates art class for today. And if you have downloaded all the files and bits and bobs, then you should have this picture. So this picture is an aerial view of ocean and beach. I don't know where yet, but I will find out and let you know. And it's a photo taken by my nephew. So he has a drone and he kind of loves to take all these aerial shots, which I think are amazing. I just think they're the best things, and it's going to be heaps of fun to paint this one. So we'll get cracking on that. I'll just switch my screen over to my desk so that you'll be able to see what I'm doing on my table. So bear with me one momento while I do that. Press all the right buttons and hopefully the Wi-Fi is going to play nicely. There we go. We're in business. That's my camera. Lovely. So that's my tabletop that you can see there, and I'll be working flat on my table today. Just pull that out a little bit so it's a bit wider. Oops, wrong page. If you're like me, I've got about 54 tabs open on my computer. So there's a lot of stuff going on in here. All right, so to start today's class, you'll need your art diary or drawing page or book. And I just use a normal little diary like this. It's a spiral bound one, and I can keep all my drawings and notes and bits and bobs in there, and they stay reasonably clean and don't mess up anything else in my art room. So it's a nice place to keep everything. And the first part of the class, as always, will be our little black and white picture or sketch of today's subject. It's always a good way to rehearse your image and just get familiar with it and look at the tones and the shapes and the layout and kind of process it one time, and then we move on to the second part and we'll do it in the colour. So if you have some charcoal handy, that's what you're going to need today. So this is my little Willow box of charcoal. It's a cheapy brand and it's good enough for this kind of exercise. I like the Willow charcoal because it's really soft and you can kind of rub it off and erase it and push it around really easily and get some really soft marks with it. So this little tin comes with a range of sizes and they all have that foil in the end, which I find really annoying because then I've got to try and get it off. It's supposed to protect your hands from getting dirty, but they kind of get dirty anyway. So yeah. Okay, so let's get started. I like to start off with drawing up my page or the dimensions of my page. So today we're working on landscape format, and this is designed to fit into a A4 or a colour fix size, which is generally 23 by 30 centimetres. A4 is, or A4, I'll just write that. So that's what size we're kind of working with today. So what I like to do is just draw up my little area like this to be around about the same proportions. You can fill up your whole page if you want to, or you can do something even smaller than that. But I just find that that's a good way to get my head around the shape and start drawing in all the different aspects of this picture. So you can see on the coloured version, I've put a grid on there for you so that you can actually see where the centre lines and the quarter lines are, etc. So what I like to do once I've drawn up this part is to put my grid lines on. And so you can either do just a middle one across the centre and down the middle, or you can divide it into even more squares. And I know this is not exactly straight or perfect, but it'll do for this stage. I actually like to treat this stage like a little bit of a relaxed session where we don't get too caught up in the dimensions and the measurements and things, and just try to keep it kind of loose and easy. So next thing we want to do now is start to look at the shape of the picture. So I'm going to refer to the colour version just so I can get everything in the right place in relation to the grid lines. And then when we start doing the black and white tones and shadings, we can look back at this black and white picture. So you've got two options there. And the black and white version is a really good way just to see how dark something is or how light something is, and also the shape of things. So let's draw up the basic outlines for this picture. I'm going to start in the bottom right corner because that's quite a defined mark or arc there. So we've got all this beautiful white sand down here at the base, and then it arcs up, and I'm just looking at where it fits into the grid area. So you can see that it crosses over into these two grids here on the second row, and then it sort of comes down, and it's about where those two grid lines meet is where the arc or the bend in that sand and rock stops. So we've basically just got a nice little arc going through here. And then I'm just going to draw a line down through this bottom grid line to mark off where the edge of the sand is. So basically I've just marked off the sand, which is the lighter area on this bottom right hand corner. And then we have this line coming straight across inside this grid line, which looks like rock. So I haven't really studied this properly, but I'm thinking, yeah, must be rock. And then all of this here is water. Funny, if you look at things as shapes rather than things, it's often a little easier to just draw them rather than trying to figure out what they are. If you just focus on the shape and the colour and the tone, it becomes apparent in the end. And I think that's what I get the most joy from doing this kind of thing, is just looking at breaking everything down into shapes and colours and putting them where you see them. And then when you step back, you see the whole picture and it all comes together. It's kind of magical. So while I've been yabbering on, I've just drawn in a few baselines of the edges of things. So I know this is a few rocks here, not just one, but there's a main line that kind of comes down through this grid arc here. And that indicates this rock ledge that sort of is sweeping around the coastline there. So I'm just going to mark one hard line there, and then I'll come back and do the details later. Okay. So we've got our sandbar there, we've got rocks, and they come down into here as well. So try to just see things as outlines or shapes rather than rocks and sand and so forth. And just look at outlines at this stage. Don't worry too much about the detail either. You know, I don't want to get too caught up in getting every little stone or rock in there at this point, because we just really need to study all the shapes, see how everything fits in together. So I'm up in this top section of this rocky outcrop now. I've started on the right hand side of my page, and I'm just drawing this outline here. So I'm just looking at the basic outline of the top of that crop of rocks. So what it's doing is it's coming across. We've got lots of little loose ones there. I'm going to ignore them for now. Then we've got this little bit that juts out here. And then we come down and there's water in between these two. So we've got a gap there, and it crosses over into the grid line here, comes back up through there, and then pokes back into this grid area and then goes back over again. So it's like a zigzag sort of shape that we can create here with the rocks. And so if you just follow the outline of the outside of them, then hopefully it will all kind of join up in the end and make sense. So that's a very loose outline of where everything sits. And I know there's water in between some of those, so we'll put that in as well. But we're just getting the main shapes in for now. Okay, and then there's another little crop over here. So I'm just going to draw that one in as well. So as I said, there was water between those two. They didn't quite join up enough for me to make one complete line. So I've broken that one down and just drawn that through there. And we've got another little outcrop over here. So when everything becomes a shape, it seems to get a whole lot easier to draw and break down into pieces. And then basically everything else above that area is water. So it's all the same thing basically. And then all we have in there is shades, I suppose, or tones of grey. And then you've got all your white foam, you know, making those beautiful patterns in the water and around the edges of the rocks. So you could actually do this in quite an abstract format if you wanted to. If you didn't really want to get into every little bit of rock and shadow and detail, you could make this kind of quite loose and abstract, because there's some really beautiful colours in those rocks and in the water. And you know, the way that the waves and the foam are all kind of blending together, and you know, it's much more intense around the edges of the rocks, and then as the water goes away from us, it sort of fades out from green to dark blue, so you've got really nice tonal scales there. So you could actually have a lot of fun with this one, you know, with big bold strokes and lots of amazing colours, and not necessarily blending either. All right, so now we've got those main shapes in, let's just focus a little bit further on a tiny bit more of the detail. So what I want to do is this rock here, I haven't you know, separated that from the other ones because there is a little ridge there between the two of those. So I'm just going to put that in now, bring that down through there, and always referring back to your grid lines. So when you can look at the grid and see how far away from a certain, you know, a line does that mark sit, you know, what's the distance from here to there, and measure it with your eye, or if you need to use a ruler or something like that, you can do that. But it's just I find it a really useful way for drawing. Some people hate it, but we've all got to find what works for us, haven't we? And you know, often freehand is a great way too, but I just think the grid helps get everything in perspective. I'm just looking at this now, realising I've gone up too high there. So when you kind of get your main lines in, then it's time to sort of, before we do any more work on this, just run around the thing with your eyes and check that, you know, this is sitting down this far inside that grid line, even though my grid lines are not spot on at the moment. And the angle of things. So these rocks all seem to be sweeping around in this interesting angle, which is kind of cool and creates a lovely formation. And I think it's a nice composition for a painting too, because your eye kind of wanders around it. So you've got like a journey to take across the page. And, you know, they say when you are creating art that what you want to do is think about the focal point, what people are going to be, or where the eye will go first, and then get the eye to kind of travel around a painting. So, you know, you might have one bright focal point. For me, on this particular picture, it's the shadow on the sand that I love the most, this shadow here. That's what drew my eye, and I think it's because it's the dark shadow against the really bright white sand. And so that was the first thing I saw. And then I started to kind of wander around it with my eyes and think, oh, wow, that's really beautiful. Look at all the formation in the rocks, and, you know, look at the colours in those rocks. And then going out towards the water and all the beautiful greens and blues in that. And it tells a story, and it gives you joy to look at something like that and kind of discover it, I suppose. So it's really nice to create a little journey or a story in your artwork that, you know, people can kind of look at for a long time and just really soak it up and appreciate it and see all the different elements. So now we've got our basic lines drawn in there. It looks a bit messy, doesn't it? Let's just do a bit of shading so that we can get an idea of the darks and the lights. So if you look at your black and white version of this, you can see that the darkest areas are all within the rocks. So we've got all this beautiful dark shadow happening there. And that's what's so appealing about this, is we've got really dark darks and then we've got this really bright white sand and beautiful white foam of the water. And that's, you know, it kind of draws your eye, I think. So I'm going to just jump back over into my picture here, and I'm just going to shade off some of the greys in the water, because that's like a mid-grey. If you look at your black and white picture, it's sort of a mid-colour. And this is where you want to start thinking about colours and noticing where the mids and the lights and the darks are, because you're going to have to then go and choose colours that will be the right tones, basically. So it's great to sort of study that and figure out, you know, where's it lightest, where's it darkest, what colour can I use for that tone? Do I need a light green or a dark green or a mid green? Does it need to be a bluey green or a, you know, more yellow green? What kind of green is that? And how do I make it darker? If I don't have one that's actually that dark or the right colour, how can I make it? So this is the time when your brain starts processing that stuff and really thinking about, you know, wow, that area there is slightly darker. You can't see it quite so well on the grey version, but to me, the top left corner of the water is a little bit darker, or maybe that's only because it's bluer. Everything's an optical illusion, really, isn't it? So we can put some white back in here just with the erasers and, you know, take out the edges and make some little marks with the kneadable eraser, and that'll put your white foam back in. Sometimes you've got to put the darks down to get the whites back. Okay. And you can see, you know, there's different little tones of grey in the water too, which must be rocks and things underneath around the edges there. So there's some darker patches and lighter patches. They're very subtle, but they are definitely there. So let's say that's the tone for my water, or, you know, the grey tone for there. And then I'm going to go over here into the shadow on the sand. So that was the part that really attracted my eye. And I'm going to say that that is about the same tone as the water, I reckon, as far as grey goes, or value. Same tone or value as the water. So I want to make sure that, you know, it stays around about the same value so that it all kind of comes together in the end. And I'm going to leave the sand area uncoloured because that's my lightest area. That's where the sun's hitting that sand. Now, it's not pure white in the picture. It's got a kind of tingy tone to it because sand is not, in this area anyway, not bright white. It's got a lovely little pinkish tone. But for this exercise, I'm just going to leave it unpainted or uncoloured. And just look at those tones. Again, you can see the bay of rocks here that's next to the sand, in between the sand and the water. We've got this slopey rock area, which is also the same tone as the water. So can you see what I'm saying? They're all kind of the same grey, the same kind of tones of grey. And so we just want to fill all that in with some charcoal to get those tones into your head. And then again, thinking about what colours can I use to get that tone when I do this in colour. Okay, and now we've got all this beautiful rocky stuff, which has a lovely contrast from lights to darks. And so with the dark area, let's start down here around in the sand. We've got that beautiful horseshoe kind of bay. So I'm going to press pretty hard here with my charcoal, just make it nice and dark, because that's got lots of lovely shadow. If you zoom right in, you can see there's trees in there. So like tree tops, and it's like a cliff face. So for now though, I just want to make that fairly dark because it's quite black in there, and that's where you create the drama in your art, because you've got these beautiful, rich, dark, strong, dark tones. And then I'm just going to go back in to the black and white version and see this, there's a little rocky outcrop here on the top right, and it's also quite dark. So we're not doing any great detail at this point, we're just focusing on the darks and the lights and getting those drawn in. And you can see that the top of the rocks where they're lightest, so there's beautiful light sandy colours, when you're looking at the tone of those, they're also very similar to the sand and the light areas, aren't they? Even though it's not white or bright in colour, it's light in tone. So this area in here, in the rocks, it's got a few little, crevices and shadows and things running through it, but essentially that's quite light through there. And so try not to colour that area too much. And then we've got a lot of dark in between, so the next crop of rocks that sort of shoots up has a beautiful dark side in here. So by looking at where the dark areas are, that's how you figure out where the light's coming from. So obviously the light in this picture is coming from top left. The sun must be over there, because what is happening is it's casting that beautiful shadow on the sand down in that direction, and then the right and bottom right sides of all these rocky outcrops are really dark, so they're in shadow, and then the light from the sun is hitting the tops of the rocks on the left top sides, and that's why they're a little lighter. And they're all kind of different shapes too, so I don't know if you remember doing our rock class, but we're working a lot on texture and making things look like bricks and rocks and so forth. You'll also notice that the water in between the rocks that's in shadow is darker. So for instance, this area here, this bit of water here, it's between that big rocky outcrop and the next one. And there's lots of foam and stuff in there, but can you see there's an actual shadow cast by this rock into the water? So that's definitely telling us where the sun is. And same on this one up the top, it's coming across the middle there. The water in between those two areas of rocks is also a darker tone in shadow. So you could make this a very successful painting just in black and white if you wanted to. I think it would be quite beautiful done in charcoal. There's an awful lot of tone in there. It'd be heaps of fun to have a crack at that. But for today, we're just going to keep it really simple. So that's about all I want to do on the rocks at this point. Next, I want to just pick up my kneadable eraser and put in some of this foam in the water and maybe a little bit more light throughout some of the rocks. So just noticing where the really white foam is. And so when you do that, now I'm doing that, I'm thinking, oh, that bit needs to be a bit darker so that the light stands out. But, you're always kind of adjusting things to make the other thing work. So as I said, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this because I want to get onto the colour version, but it's just such a good little exercise to practice and really notice where everything sits within this picture. My black and white version doesn't look anything like it could. So it would, if I wanted to finish this off, it would require quite a bit more work. Be worth it though, be awesome. But for now, let's just mark in some of the white foam. So the kneadable eraser is great. You can just rub that around. It takes your charcoal off very easily, and you just keep kneading it to find a clean spot. Once it starts not taking it off anymore, you can then knead it and get another bit of a clean spot. I love all the little tiny little bits of shiny tops on the rocks too. That'll be fun to do in the colour version. So you can imagine that you can sort of lighten those up, and the light sides of those little rocks on the tops of the rocks against the darker water, or the other rocks that are next to them, just brings it alive, because it's all about tone. I also really love the pattern that's running through this main rock. See, it's got this beautiful kind of a flow through it. Almost looks like there's been water running through there. It's just got all these lovely curves and things. So that's really lovely. And then remember earlier I said there's trees here. So if you just dab a few spots down through there, you could make some trees quite easily. You don't want to make them too light, because what's happening is the tops of those trees are just catching the light as the sun's coming over the top of that rock face. So it'll only be the trees that are sort of tall enough to catch a little bit of light on the tops of them that will be lit up. Otherwise, everything underneath that is quite dark and in shadow. And then down here on the sand, there's lots of little dots, which I'm guessing is, rocks and stuff like that, just on the borders there. But that's really beautiful because it's such a dark spot in there. So that's our basic charcoal drawing. As I said, if you're tempted to finish it off and keep doing it, then by all means go for it. And I'm just noticing now, I'm running my eyes around the picture, noticing where the shadows are. So there's little shadows here, through there. So everything's casting a shadow, which is kind of cool. That's what's going to give this thing, the 3D effects that we want to get. It looks like it's got texture and body. Okay. So let's move on to the colour version. I think that one's going to be way fun. Now that we've rehearsed the drawing, got a bit of an idea of, where everything needs to sit and the tones, or the values. So we know that, the darks are around the rocks, and we've got all these really bright light areas, and then we've got lots of mid-tones as well. And we can have a bit of a play with that. Keep your charcoal handy, because you might want that to draw up your drawing for your next stage. First thing though is selecting some colours. So I had a look earlier for some colours, and I'll just show you what I found. So this is a very green and brown or orange based image, probably blue. So your blue and your brown are complementary colours, and they always look amazing together. So for some reason, lots of my paintings end up being that complementary blend, but of course you can add other things. So I've tried to find a palette that has a nice range from darks to lights. I didn't pick up my blue violet, which is unusual, and I may need to go and do that later, depending whether I need more dark or not. But basically, in order from dark to light, I've got these colours. So this is a phthalo green. Now I know that the water is not that dark, but that's going to help me get a little bit of the tone through the waters there. So I've got phthalo green. I'll just stay with the blues and greens for a minute. I've got this beautiful green. So that's a lovely sea green, which is going to work nicely in my water. I've also got this blue, because I can see blue in there as well. So those three together will make a really nice combination for the waters. So phthalo green, and then a sea jade green, I guess, and then this lovely it's a warm blue. So I don't know what it's called, but that's a lovely blue. You can imagine all of those kind of mixed together, creating a really nice tonal scale for my water. And then I've got, so that's kind of my watercolours basically, plus white afterwards. And then for my rocks, I've got this dark purple. Now it's not blue violet, I don't think. No, it's not quite as dark as that. A bit warmer though. I can see a lot of purple in those rocks. Purple's beautiful for shadows, so I thought that's going to be yummy for that. And then I found a reddy brown colour. So again, that's a nice kind of dark for my rocks. And I've got a terracotta orange kind of colour as well. So if you're ever looking for colours and don't know what to choose, just kind of hover them over your picture like that and see if you can find it in there. And I can. So that's, I find, the best way to choose your colours. I picked up this lovely bright orange because I can see a bit of orange in there. I thought that'd be fun, just to pop a bit of brights through there. And I also got this one, which is like a sandstone colour. So they're very earthy colours, those ones. And that'll work for my rocks as well as my sand bay down here next to the sand. And then I've got this purple, so I can see this in the shadows on the sand. So that lovely shadow area in there, and probably in some of the water in between the rocks as well. So I've got a couple of purples there, which is nice. And for my sand, I picked up, what's this one? Australian grey. So it's a very light, creamy, pinky colour. It's a really nice colour, and that looks to me like a sandy colour. So I will probably use that, and then to get my really light areas in the sand and the water, I've got more white. So that's the colour palette that I've chosen for today. And as always, if you need to go and get other colours as we go, then there's no reason you can't do that. But it's a good idea to just start off with the basic palette first up. That way you don't get too stressed. You haven't got 150 pastels to choose from every time you go to do another bit of it. And it's nice if you just keep your palette condensed into a container or something like this. That way, if you don't get it finished today and you want to come back next week, all your colours are sitting there ready to go, and you don't have to remember what you've used. So it's all for your own benefit to do it the easy way. Make it a little bit easier for yourself. Okay, so now we've got some colours sorted out. I'm going to get my paper and tape it down onto my little board. So I haven't actually looked at papers yet. What did I write? Good colour would be green, mid-grey, or a soft umber. We're going to fill it all up so it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to see what I've got in my drawer. That would work. Just found this blue, so I think that might do. It's like a sea blue kind of colour. I think that will do for that one nicely. And get my little board, which still has last week's on it. So when I'm working flat on my table, I just have a small board that I can tape my paper onto. That way it stays still, you don't have to hold it down all the time, and keeps everything flat. Same if you're on an easel, you'll still need a board to tape your paper onto, because it just stays still. And then being on an easel is better because then all the dust from your pastels will drop off down into the tray and you don't have to keep removing it. So I'm just move some of these things out of the way. Put my palette back there so you can see that. And taping down my paper. So I'm using this blue tape. It's called 14, I think it's 14 tape. It's what painters use, and they're masking off areas that they don't want to cover up with paint. I've reused these pieces of tape a couple of times now, so they're not very sticky, which is good because they come off easy. But you can see last time I took it off, it's torn some of my paper. So if you have fresh tape, just make sure that you stick it to your table or your clothing or something like that first, just to get some of that sticky off, because it can tear. And when it tears, it's really sad because you wreck your painting. And when you do take your tape off, it's stuck on there now. When you do take it off, pull it away from the painting. Don't pull it in the other way, in towards, in this way. Don't, see how that's already starting to peel? I'll show you. See, that's peeling there. So it's grabbed that corner and it's starting to rip. Sometimes, if it's really stuck, it'll pick up this gessoed area where the pastel mat is on the paper and tear that as well. So when you do take it off, make sure you pull it outwards away from the center of your page, because even then, if it does tear, it's going to go that way instead of into the painting. So tip for the day. Lovely. Okay, so as I said earlier, any colour paper would be fine. What would be really nice actually be a dark purple, or aubergine or something like that, because it's got such beautiful rich purples in there. But anyway, that's what I found first, so that'll have to do for now. Just got to find my ruler. Not sure where I've put that, because I want to measure this one up properly. And I'm going to use some charcoal to do that, because I've got a light coloured paper, so I'll be able to see the charcoal easily on the page. I can't see my ruler. Very strange. Checking the drawer. Sure, I had it in my hand before. Ah, there it is. I hid it under my towel. I'm not going mental after all. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, this size paper is 23 by 30. It's a colour fixed paper, so it's an Art Spectrum brand, and it's slightly larger than an A4. So the picture I've got on your notes today is proportioned out to fit into this size paper. But if you only have A4, that's okay too. It'll still work. It'll still be fine. So all you need to do is find your halfway marks and your quarter-way marks. So for this paper, 15 is halfway and 7.5 is quarter. So I'm just marking those areas in. When I do mark these in, usually I try to remember to mark the marks on my border, so that when you fill it all in and you can't find your grid lines because you've put all the pastels down, and you still maybe want to know where something should be further into your drawing, if you've got your little marks on the outside here, it's a bit easier to find out. So that's why I do that. So halfway down the side is 11.5, which is 5 3/4. 4/4. And then the same on this side. 11 3/4. Like that. You can put your marks on your tape too, if you've taped right to the edge like I have. Sometimes you might want to use a white pencil or a light one if you've got dark tape. So just so you've got reference to those grids later on if you need them. And then I'm just going to lightly draw this up. Now, if you're on a dark paper, you'd be wanting to use a pastel or a charcoal pencil to do this, because then you can push it in or take it off and it'll be fine. Don't press too hard though. Don't use a graphite or a lead pencil, because that will, it's kind of marks the paper and shows through the pastel often. So it's not the best option. Graphites and lead pencils don't work well with pastel. Okay, so I'm just going to rule up my grids like this. And now I've got my page all ready to draw in the outline of my shapes, just like we did before. So it's the same process, only this time we won't be doing the colouring with charcoal, we'll be doing it with pastels. But you've still got to get your main drawing, you know, set up. And so I like to do that pretty much the same way as we did before. So starting on the bottom right corner and focusing on that little sand bay area, just going to draw in the shape of that. And noticing how high up into those grid areas that comes. And then the angle of the rocks that sit on the side of the sand bay there. So make sure that, you know, they come in just before the grid line on the base there. They come almost to the top where the two grid lines join here. So that's how you kind of get the angle of what you need by determining where the end of each part sits in relation to your grid lines. The other half of that starts about here. So I've just got a little triangle inside this grid line of sand, and then you can continue that line over through into this grid area. So everything, I kind of measure everything by sight, and when you do it for a while and get practiced at it, it gets a bit easier. You might want to, you know, if you feel like you need to use a ruler, like, you know, for example, you could get your picture and you could say, okay, so how far up on that grid line does that arc go to there? So I can go, okay, that's 1 centimetre on the picture. And if this grid section is 3.5 centimetres high, then it's going to be just under 1/3 of the way up. You know, you kind of just work it out doing that sort of calculation in your brain. So you don't have to do it by the millimetre. You can say, well, that's about 1/3, halfway is about there, so 1/3 must be about there, so it's about there. That's how I do it anyway. That's the Sagittarian in me. Everything's a hit and miss. If you're very particular about everything, then you will probably have your own precision method for getting things in the right place. But yeah, I try not to get too caught up in that. I mean, it is good to do that, you know, especially if you're doing things like portraits and animals and things that do actually require that measuring is perfect. And then, of course, you just have to, excuse me, yeah, you just have to measure to get everything right, because doing portraits and things is such precision work. Whereas this, even though, you know, they're solid items, it you can get away with a little bit of variation. Just drawing down through here. See, that's the little area between the rocks, so this is where the water is. So I guess I'm getting a bit more precise with my shapes now and really tracing around, you know, the edges to make sure I get all these in the right spot. Noticing, you know, where they cross over on the grid line. So for instance, this rock here, that's this big dark one. The top of that crosses over there on that middle line. So if you find your centre grids, the one that goes across and down, find your exact middle, look at your picture, and you can see that this crop of rocks crosses over right there in the middle. So that's, you know, it's another way of finding where things go and where they intersect. Intersecting is the thing. And then that comes down and it kind of joins up then to the rock above it. And so then we can sort of wander back up through there and bring that rock face or rock shape across and then come back down. So see how I'm sort of just going around the edges of it now. widening there. It's got a little round bit on there. And then that comes down and we come back in here. A few little zigzaggy areas, you know, where the rocks are jutting out into the water. And then, oops, went a bit tall there. So again, looking at how far above that grid mark does that little bit of rock sit, and just making sure it sits low enough. And then we've got a dip down here, and then it comes down, and then we've got a square bit. So kind of just run your charcoal or pencil around. Once we get some colour in, it'll start to make more sense even. A couple of rocky crops here, and another one there. And this one continues up, crosses over where these two red lines are. You see how it all sort of just starts to come together, hopefully. We end up with all these pieces. That's water, that's that rock there. And it's easy to get a bit lost sometimes too. Hang on, where's the edge of that? That rock, so that comes down through there. Just stay in your grid lines. Keep checking, checking, checking on your grid lines, where everything intersects and crosses over. How far away from things they are. Okay. I've got all this coming around through here. So it's just shapes. Just think of it as shapes that sit within different areas. And then you can kind of start to look at the light and dark in these rocks, especially this really big one that's coming around here in the cove. So if I look at that, then I can start to sort of mark in where the light sections are and get those shapes drawn in as well. Again, checking against your grid marks, a bit too low there. And then, you know, marking in the light top of that cliff face there, so I can kind of trace that line around and determine, you know, what side will be dark and what side will be light. So it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle at the moment, and if you try to figure out all the bits, it gets slightly confusing. That's okay. We can do this. We can make this work out. Good. Good, good. Once we start putting tone and things in, then it'll start coming together. At the moment, it's just all a bunch of squiggly lines that don't mean much. So that's the drawing part. And I think we might have a short break now. Grab some water. Just got a tickle in my throat. What I'll do is I'll leave the drawing here on the screen for you to check back on if you are still doing that bit. And I've also left my palette here, the colours. So if you're still choosing colours, then you've got that there to refer to. And we'll come back in about 8 minutes. So let's say 10:35. I think, yes, that'll work out. All right, I'll see you shortly. All right, so we're going to keep on going now. We're going to start to block in some of the colours. So what I want to do is just start to put colour down on the paper, not necessarily a lot of it, but just to start mapping it out so you can now begin to see where things have to go. I've already popped a bit of dark on here, so I'm just going to darken this up with my dark purple. So I want to try and use this purple in my shadows because I just dearly love purple in shadows. And this might be a red one, but I'm not quite sure. So if you just get a little bit of pastel and literally just kind of rub it around on the paper and follow the edges of the rocks that you've drawn in and darken off, or put the darkest colour down where you can see where it's really quite black and in shadow. So just be loose with it. Don't worry about getting it everywhere and not being able to cover it up later on. If we just go lightly at this stage, we'll be able to then come back over it again. So the whole idea of getting colour down at this point is so that we can push it into the paper and get the paper to hold onto it and put the foundation layer down basically. And then we can come back in and add the detail and get more pastel onto the paper. So you'll find you get quite a decent amount of pastel onto this kind of paper. Don't worry about all the little, those little, what look like rocks or shadows or those kinds of little dotty things down there. I mean, you can pop a few marks in like that if you want to, but we don't really need to get too focused on those details just yet. So what I've done there is just put shadow or dark in where I can see the darkest area of the rocks. And now I want to pick up some of my blue and green and start marking in the colours of the water. So I'm literally just going to start putting some colour down around about where I want to get those colours on my page. And again, just do it really loosely. So this is my phthalo green. I know it's not the blue colour in the water, but it's going to be a good base. And then I can pop some blue over the top and the other greeny colour as well. What I'm trying to do is get a nice sort of dark base to start creating some of the shadow or the depth in the water. Just running that around very loosely. See, I'm not putting a lot down. The secret is to not put too much down at the start. So you just want to start off light and then you can build it up as you go. Now there's also a kind of a greeny tinged colour over here. That's where this water sits inside the bay there. So I'm just going to put a little bit of that there as well. Knowing that once I go over it and blend in other colours, it's not going to be as strong or as obvious. So it looks a bit messy. This is the messy bit. This is where you're just starting to get your colour down and not getting too caught up in the detail. Okay, so now I want to continue on in the water. I'm going to pick up this blue now. Remember this beautiful blue I picked up earlier? And I'm just going to start to smush some of that around on here too. The idea is to get some pastel on the paper so we can then push it in. We need to get a fair bit of pigment down onto the paper so that then we can start to push it around and get it sticking nicely. And the mixture of the dark green with this blue is going to give me the depth that I want. Now, I know there's a lot of white foam around those rocky areas, but I still need to get water under the foam. So I'm going to put light touches of my blues and greens around there anyway, and then we can pop the foam over the top. Because what you don't want to have is like a gap between the foam and the water. That would look weird. So it's got to be a continuous flow. Okay, so that's a bit of blue. And then I'm going to pick up my green. That's that lighter, beautiful, jadey sort of green. This colour is amazing. I hope you've got something like this because it really is a lovely colour. See that beautiful, beautiful sea green shade that it's creating. I'm going to kind of wipe that over pretty much for most of this. I'm going to leave the top left corner to be a little darker or more blue. So using this jadey green area kind of in the water that's closest to the rocks. A little bit out from there. Noticing too, popping it some down in between the rocks where there's water too. Even though it's not that green and it has got shadow on it, we just still need to get some base colours down in there first. And then we can refine it. So that's pretty much all my water sort of filled in. Now the next thing I want to do is put some sand in there, and then I'll get back into the rocks and just add a few more colours to the rocks, and then we can sort of push it all in and then start building up from there. So the sand colour, remember I said earlier I'm going to use my Australian grey for that one, and then I can heighten or brighten it if I need to later on. So what I like to do is not use my lightest or my whitest at the start and sort of save it until I get to the end, and then if I want to add a really nice bright highlight or a shine or make something whiter, I've still got room to do that because I haven't used white yet. So it's sort of saving the light for last, I call it. So even though this is not white, it's still quite bright compared to the rocks and so forth. Nearly missed that little bit of sand just over there too. And because I've got green near that, I've ended up mixing in some green, but that's okay. We can go over that and push it in. So that's my sandy colour. And remember I said I'm going to use this beautiful purple for the shadow. So again, just a loose coverage. Don't get too caught up in the details and all the exact, edges and shapes and things. We can refine that as we go. That's my shadow colour. So hopefully by using the tones or the colours like this with awareness of their tones, it'll start to, it'll slowly start to make sense. And the other thing I'm going to do, remember we said there's shadow on the rock of the rocks in the water. So those big chunks of rock that are catching the light on the left, they're casting a shadow on the right. And I want my shadow colours to be these purples. So I'm going to put a bit of purple in there, in the water that's a little darker, if that makes sense, because that's what's catching the shadow. Remembering we haven't used any light in the water yet, so it might not look dark enough, but once we get some foam and a bit more light in there, the purple should be okay. And if it's not, we can always change it, darken it even more. I think purples are really beautiful for shadows. Good. So that's that bit done. And then I just want to get some of these browns and oranges up along these rocks here. So what we're pretty much doing is filling up the entire page with some colour. So this beautiful orangey terracotta colour is rather lovely. And I can put other colours in there and get my highlights and my darks in as well. And what else is there? Some of that. Not very much really. A little bit of that there. So that's that lovely deep brown. And then I've got this red brown that I quite like as well. So that can come in here as well and just contribute to building up some little crevices and creases and things in the rocks. throughout there. As I said, just literally just want to get some colour down on here. You can see that by the tones, it's already starting to look like it's got form and shape. A bit of light onto those rocks, that'll really bring them alive. So my light colour for the rocks, I can use Australian grey as well, which is what I used on the sand, but I'm going to use this sandstone umber first, just to get a little bit of light in there. And then we can kind of just whisk that along through there as well. So on the tops of those rock parts, a little bit of that as well. See how we're filling up the page? So we're getting the page to be full of pigment, which means then we can kind of start to push it in and create lots of depth. Put some of this on this little sand tray down here too. And maybe some in that green shallow water at the base there, because that's kind of a lighter green, but you can sort of see the sand through it. It's not as deep as the other water. I'll put some of this terracotta colour in there. That'll hopefully lighten that up a little bit. Might need to add something else to that to bring it lighter. So it's looking very kind of abstract at the moment. And, you know, if you like that style, then that's awesome. You might want to continue to do that and just keep the pastel loose on the page and not blend it in. I like to blend, so I want to get my fingers into this and start, you know, bringing it alive that way. But if you would prefer not to, then by all means, you know, do that. And the way not to blend is just literally keep putting pastel on like this. And what happens is the colours all sort of mix together and the pastels blend with each other. And you get a lot of colour on the surface. So you can get quite a nice effect just by doing this kind of thing and not getting your fingers into it. It keeps it a little bit looser. So if you like that loose Monet kind of look, then, you know, this might be your style. I like to do a bit of both, and I like to begin by blending my pastel into the page with my fingers and then doing this loose stuff on the next layer. But potentially you could just keep doing that kind of thing, building it up like this without really having to. And it's a really quite an enjoyable way of painting with pastels. Because once you blend, you start to make, you get a lot of muddy sort of colours and they go a bit kind of more muted, I suppose. And then you've got to bring your brights back, which isn't hard because you just put more over the top. But if you like to keep your brights as they are and not push it around too much, then you know, that method is quite good. But, yeah. Anyway, we're going to start to push some of this in now. So I've just darkened off that top left corner. Maybe it's not quite as dark as that in the actual photo, but I think it creates a little bit more drama. And it's got a lot of light on there as well. So later on, you know, I can, well, even if you wanted to do it now and leave it, you could just flicker some light on there like that. So what I did then, this is a white schminky pastel. Your schminkies are very soft And the whites are lovely for doing this kind of work and just letting it sit on the surface like that. So that could potentially, you know, be how your water stops and ends, and you don't need to do any more than that. Just let it sit like that. I can't help myself. I have to push it in and build it up and work on it. I do like the effect though, it's looking quite good. But you might have noticed too that I've got quite a lot of dust that's now gathered on my page. You can see there's little sections of pastel dust everywhere. So what I need to do is tip that off, and if you're inside, you probably should tip it off onto a cloth or something rather than blowing it everywhere, because if you blow it, it goes all over your house, and that's not fun. So I've just tipped off some of the dust, and what I'm going to do now is just start to kind of push all of this in. I might start in the bottom corner while my fingers are not too dirty. And I do have a little cloth here that I'm wiping them on, so if you don't have a cloth handy, grab yourself a little towel, a little old towel. I've just got this one, wet on one end and dry on the other. That way you can wipe your fingers clean on the wet end, give them a dry, and then my fingers are now ready to put into this light colour here, because what I don't want to do is, you know, blend the darks and then put my fingers in here and darken this off too much. So what I'm doing now is just pushing the pastel into the paper. And because we work on textured paper, it kind of grips it nicely. So what this will do is just let it all fill up the page, give me a nice base to work with, and then we can add more over the top. It's a little bit like glazing in oil paints, but they take way longer because you've got to wait for years and years for them to dry. Well, not really years, but pastels you don't have to wait for anything. Quite lovely. Now see that already, that you can already see that that's going to be an amazing shadow colour on that sand, except for a few crumbs of dust there that I need to tip off, but it's already got that feeling, hasn't it? It doesn't take long to get there, and this is the exciting part. When this starts to happen, you think, oh wow, I can't wait to see what this will be looking like. So I haven't done much detail, all I've done is just blend this in. When I've blended the shadow and the sand, actually I've pulled them in the same direction, so I'm kind of going on an angle, pulling the shadow out from the base of the rocks here into the sand, and we can sharpen up that edge later. I don't mind the blur actually. So I'm just going to work my way across here now, blend in this little rock face area. So this looks like it's quite smooth, and maybe something you could walk on and then down into the water. I must find out where this is. I'll have to text my nephew, see where we took it from. See how by blurring everything off like this, I'm wiping my finger off quite a lot now in between my colours. Blurring it all off and softening everything, just mixing it in. It's starting to take on some form. This is the exciting part. This is the bit where it just starts to look like something rather than a big blob of crazy colours. The secret is to blend things in the direction that they grow, or the shape that they are. So for instance, around in this area, this big dark area of rocks in the foreground here, remember we said that's made up of lots of trees and bush and cliff face and stuff. So you kind of want to do these short little squiggly movements to kind of sort of hint at the shadows and the shapes that are in there, if that makes sense. Because when we come back into there and start to add a little bit of highlights to the tops of the trees and shadows to the bottoms and things like that, we've already got a really nice base. And can you see how that's now already starting to look like it's much darker in here? This is casting shadow, it's hitting the top now. It's really starting to take form, isn't it? I love it. So fun. Before I get over back into that side, I'm going to kind of work my way up, I think, today. And that's the other thing you need to sort of consider when you're doing this is which direction am I going to go in? Do I want to do, you know, from top to bottom or bottom to top or left to right? Which way is this going to take me? So I'm just going to kind of work my way across the page. And as I said, everything's going to be blurry at this stage because we're just gently pushing colour into the paper. And then we can start to build up the tones, shapes and things with more pastel as we get going. But for now, I just want to start getting all this beautiful seawater pushed in here. And again, looking at the shape of the water around where you're pulling it and pushing it, kind of moving your hand in that direction. So there's movement there. You've got a lot of water moving around those rocks and they're creating waves and foam. So it's not just, you know, up and down lines and things. You really need to kind of think about which direction is that moving into. Does it go up and down, or that you're moving around and out? So kind of try to move your finger in those directions because now we're creating this beautiful undercurrent, maybe you call it. Undercurrent in the water that will then become, you know, the foam and the movement and the different tones. And so you can see how the different tones of the blues and the greens are all blending together, creating really nice combinations, aren't they? It's lovely. Yum. I think this is going to be a goodie. All right. So as I said, I'm wiping my finger off a lot because I don't want to put brown in my green yet or too much green in my green, etc. Just working my way around here, slowly pushing everything in as I get to it. But even so, it's starting to come alive. So just pushing in all these brown area with my rocks. Now, if you don't have the same colours as mine, then you might find you have to use something different. That's okay. As long as, at the end of the day, the colour itself doesn't really matter that much. It's the tones. It's the tones that make all the difference. And you can see that right there. You know, that really light sand and the purple shadow, you know, they're the right tones for those things. So that's why it works. Wouldn't matter what colour it was. If this was bright yellow and that was blue, it would still do the same thing. So it's all about the tones of the colours that you're using. You could do this in any colour at all, as long as you had the right lights and darks to indicate your shadow and your form. That's all that really matters. So this little scattering of rocks up here, I know there's lots of rocks there, but I'm just making that one big brown bit for now. Probably should have put some sand or something underneath it in hindsight. But that's okay, because we still can. Okay, so you can see that's coming together quite nicely. I will put a bit of sand or white. I'm going to put some light in through here because it's probably more foam or ocean foam than sand, but it is light through there, so I just want to get a bit of that in there with my Australian grey. And then I can push that in, so it's not going to stay light, it'll kind of merge in with my blues and browns. And then I can put the foam and sharpen up the rocks and things and just make sure I've got that lighter tone to begin with. So it's just thinking about, you know, what tone is there and what's underneath, and how can I make a thing look darker? You can make it look darker if you have something next to it that's light. or under it that's light. Just gently running your finger around, pushing it all in. Again, noticing the movement in the water. So do those random kind of fluffing little movements with your fingers so that it carries the water around in that shape and looks like it's moving. When we put the foam on, it should come alive, hopefully. Love these colours, they're so nice. Beautiful blues and greens. So, because I put quite a lot of pastel on here before, just to show you how you didn't need to blend if you didn't want to. And now I'm going to push it all in. I just like how I get a really nice smooth coverage with the first layer, pushing it in like this. Gives me a really good base. So you need to kind of now, once you've got all this pushed in, I want to start to look at the shapes in the water, because there's so many different shapes and there's so much movement in there. So just kind of see if you can push your colours around to create that lovely movement, the direction that the water might be flowing. And, you know, some areas are deeper than others too. So, for instance, you know, where there's up around in here, there's lots of foam, which we haven't put in yet. But underneath there, I can see there's some rocks, or, you know, there's a bit of something under there, in that bit there. So I can just sort of push in a bit of my red or brown to indicate that, you know, there's something underneath the water there. And then when we put all the foam around it, it'll kind of make more sense. And you need to sort of overlap everything so that we don't end up with a big gap between things. So even if you have to overlap the water with the rocks a little bit, at this stage, it's fine to do that. It just means that you're going to have a nice continuous blend of colours. All right, I think that's coming along quite nicely. Should be taking progress shots as we go. I am going to tip off some of this dust though, because it's gathering on my page. Getting in the way a little. Okay, so let's work on, might do some work on the rocks, I think. No, let me rethink that. I think we might do the water and then the rocks, because the water is kind of around or under the rocks. So let's work on the water and then we can build on the rocks. So what I want to do first up is get some of the foam marks in there. I'm going to use my Australian grey, so that's my sand colour, knowing that I can come back and add white where I need to. So I just want to put some foam in, sort of just little squiggly lines like this, here and there. I'll show you what I'm intending to do. So that's my Australian grey. So what's happening is, as I'm drawing with that, it's actually picking up pigment underneath it. So it's picking up the blues and the greens, and it's kind of mixing it around. And I don't mind that. That's fine. I kind of wanted it to do that because pastels will pick up whatever's underneath. I'm just doing these little soft squiggly marks. I don't want to press too hard just yet. Now around this area here, there's quite a lot of white. But what we want to do is try to keep it kind of natural looking. So when you do fill it up and put it in, just sort of do squiggly marks. Press a little bit harder here and there, and that will start to build up the depth of the foam. So the lighter you press, if you've got a fairly hard pastel, that will be a better option. The lighter you press, the sort of softer the mark will be, and then the harder you press, you'll get a brighter, stronger pigment. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at this white area here, picture, just there, looking at this section here. So it comes out quite light from the area of the rock there, where it touches the rock. And then as it spreads out into the water, it kind of gets lighter and more muted, that kind of lighter green sea colour. So to achieve that, I'm just pressing lightly with my sandy coloured pastel and just going really lightly out further into the water. But then as I get closer in towards the rock, I want to press a bit harder. And because I haven't used white, I know that I can now put white in those whitest areas, and that will really pop and bring it nice and bright. Okay. So there's quite a lot of foam and light areas around in here. So what I'm doing is I'm just doing more of those squiggly kinds of things through there. A little bit down in here. We can always come back over it with darker colours to, make it more shadowed, or brighter colours to brighten it up. So don't stress if you feel like it's, looking a bit weird at the moment. The other thing to be aware of is just try to keep your mark sort of random. You don't want to be making the same shapes everywhere, because this is the ocean and it's a natural thing. So, not every wave is the same. So anyway, once you've got some of that on there, like that, what you can do is kind of just dab it with your fingers. What I'm doing is dabbing it in, so I'm softening it off a little bit. You can see I'm not looking at the surface foam, I'm looking at kind of the next level under that, which is a lighter colour, and it's sort of underneath the top foam. So I'm sort of softening all of this off to try and achieve that softer foamy effect. And then I can come back over with my lighter colour, whether it's white or something even a bit lighter than my Australian grey, to put the highlights in. So if you just gently, very gently, you don't have to press too hard, because if you press hard, what will happen is you'll just push it into your water colour and it'll get all milky. And then if you do need to brighten that up again, or get some more of your greens or blues back in, you can just pop some more on the top like this. Remember, we've got to do our rocks over this, so don't stress too much about those at this point. So I'm just trying to create that kind of wave effect on all the foam around here. And it's quite dense around each of the rocks, isn't it? And it sort of fades out towards the water. So you could potentially make it quite thick around the rocks. All down through here, down on the left-hand side, in between the rocks, it's quite thick down in there too. So again, I'm just doing like squiggly lines because I want it to look as natural as possible. And again, we can lighten up some of these areas when we want to get some more brights in there. This is just the base kind of layer of the foam. Down in between the rocks, it's kind of more blue in there actually, now that I'm looking at it closely. So we've got the purple in there for the shadows. I think we need to put some blue in there. All through here, we need some blue through there too. So I'll put this colour down as well. And I'm going to get some, like a sky blue. So I'm also going to break this pastel because I want to use it on its side. It's a sad thing when you have to break them, but it's often a lot easier because you can cover more ground on its side like this. And again, pressing harder for a stronger colour, and then lighter. Keep it softer. A lot of them through there. So even if you don't have Australian grey, something like a cream, pale grey even could work. Just try to avoid white until the end, until you want to really highlight something. And notice where it's lightest, where the sun's catching all this foam. So up here in the water, we've got a few little light sections. You can see they're sort of got wavy shapes going like that. And then out there, remember out there on the top right corner, we've got all the water catching the light over there too. Again, I'm still using my creamy colour. I can go brighter afterwards if I want to. There we go. So that's starting to come together. A bit of foam down in here too. Kind of everywhere, isn't it? All around all the edges pretty much. Very foamy beach. Much easier if it's on its side. I was trying not to break it. I hate breaking them. Okay. I'm going to go back over to where I began. Remember, I pushed all that in because I wanted to sort of soften off the underneath, but now I want to kind of start to fill up some of the foam and get it to sit on the top. And be brighter. Dabbing it in is good because you soften it off a little bit and push it underneath, I guess, for want of a word. And then I can so many patterns in there. So many little lines and patterns and different directions that things are going in. So I'm just pressing very lightly. I'm not putting too much pressure on here because I don't want to make it all muddy or muted. Try and retain, you know, the depth of the blues and the brightness of the foam. So I think that's working okay. So next thing I can do, I'm just going to find a blue because I feel like I want to put that in between the rocks. I'll find the right blue. I don't know if that's right. Let's see. It looks a lot like the purple. What else have I got? You see blue a lot in artwork, and I always love what it does. It's like a light. Yeah, that's good. So this is a lighter blue over that purpley colour, and see, it just gives it, yeah, nice. So this could be the colour of my foam in the shadows, basically, over the purples and the other blue. Purple back in. Put some of my blue in there. So the foam in the shadow area is more blue than white and cream. It's kind of cool. And then on the other side where the sun's coming from, it's much whiter. And again, that's another way of, you know, creating texture and form, because you're using colour to indicate your tones. And sometimes it's quite surprising which colours will do that. I think that might work. Just pop a bit more cream or grey in there, just to give a few little highlights happening. And then all the other foam, not all the other foam, but a lot of the other foam is much lighter. So that's telling us that the light's hitting that side. So, do I want to put white on there yet? I'm going to find a shorter piece because I don't want to break that one. Okay, so this is a short piece of white. It's white. They also get so dirty when they hang out together, these guys. You can't tell what's what after a while. Let's just try this bit here. It's not a schminky, I can tell. It's a little bit harder, so I've got to press a bit firmer to get it to be whiter. Is that working? Yes. See how the light or the white from that just really makes it catch the light and stand out. So that's why you save your white for those bits, because that's what you want to highlight. And then the other stuff, the other light colours, just become like a support for it. Because you don't want to add white straight away, otherwise it becomes diluted and it doesn't, you know, retain its brightness, because it sort of gets a little bit lost. But this way, we put it down where it's whitest. And again, try to keep your movements a little random and natural. So that's why a short stumpy piece like this is good, because I can just lie it down and push harder here and there and a bit lighter here and there. I can also use it to mix the colours around with each other. And by having it on its side, I get a wider line, but I also get something a little bit more random than I would if I was using the tip of the pastel. So just remembering the sun's coming from the top left, so it's catching the tops of all this foam where there's no shadow. Some little bits through here on the little beachy area. Just some funny little shapes through there. Some rocks in there too. Don't put them in yet. Here is a key area. So this bit here needs to be as white as we can get it, because then this bit here, this foam in here, you can see there's a distinct shadow line of the rock in the water there. And so all of this in there has to be darker. You see how that works? So again, you can just press lightly and kind of mix it with the colours underneath, or press nice and hard and get a really white layer. You might need to wipe your pastel off in between sections as well, just to clean it again before you put it down on your paper, because sometimes it will carry whatever colour you just had underneath it. So if this was a schminky, it would be sort of sitting on the surface much nicer and could possibly be whiter, but it's probably an art spectrum or something. So it's still working and it's fine. But you'll find different brands will affect your painting in different ways, because if they're soft and creamy, they'll sit on the surface, whereas if they're harder like this, you'll be able to actually layer a lot more. Through there, a few little white bits in here that I'm going to highlight. And that's through there. I've got a few that come out from here. A few little wavy bits. Lots of little shiny bits on the water too. And again, if you feel they're too bright or, a bit much, you just dab them in softly with your finger. So don't rub it. If you rub, you just mix it all with the colours that are on there. But if you dab it gently, it'll sort of push it in and mute it down a little bit so they're not too bright. All right, we need to get stuck into these rocks now. So I've kind of overlapped a lot of the rocks and lost some of them, but I know where they are basically. So now we can start to work on those again. And then if we need to come back in and touch up some of the water, we can. I was just thinking I probably need a lighter green in there somewhere. Anyway, we'll get stuck into the rocks now and mark them back in. So what I want to do is use this. This is my mid-tone rock colour. I'm going to mark this one back in. So literally just picking up your mid-brown or reddy brown, whatever colour you're using, to get the shapes back in there. I kind of lost some of the edges with putting all the water around them, and that's okay. That's good, because now we've got continuous edges that don't have gaps around them. This one comes down through here. And then we've got a couple of little rocks on that edge there. So come up that way. And we'll have to do some more toning with these guys, so we'll have to get some darks back in there and some lights, and then we'll get the form happening again. So this one here runs through here, and they're not all straight lines, are they? They're all kind of odd shapes and a bit craggy around the edges. And bring that one down through there. And then one kind of jots out there. So just checking the shapes too, because they're not all the same shape. We want to make sure we vary that a little bit and make it look as natural as we can. This big one down through there. You can imagine the tops of these rocks are, you know, quite sharp and different heights. And so we want to get a few sharp edges and things in there. I think I've gone right off with my shape here. Down through there. So that's going to be the dark side. And we need some more lights on the top of that one afterwards. And this one comes down through. And there's lots of little rocks up through there in that section there. So that'll just be a matter of darks and lights to get the highlights and the shadows going on. Okay, so now I've got some of that down. I'm going to just push it in a little bit so it sticks. Give your fingers a little wipe. And then we've got to get some darks in. So again, study where those darks are within the rocks. So I've picked up my dark purple. Now I know if I need to go with black or something darker, I can. So it's a bit like the white theory. You know, I don't go all the way to my darkest in the beginning, because that way I'll give myself space to do that if I need to. So, and I probably will at this rate. I'm feeling like this isn't going to cut it for me.
Jeanne, what colour are you using for that darker?
I feel like it's a blue violet. I thought it was a dark purple, but I think it's blue violet.
Thank you.
Yeah, looks like.
Okay.
It doesn't seem to be dark enough. I'm going to have to get some black, I think. Or maybe a really dark blue would work. So this is when you get to this point, you kind of think, well, what else can I use in there? What can I mix together? Because, you know, we're mixing our colours on the paper, and you can create some amazing darks or, you know, black kind of colours with blues and purples and different colours. So you don't always necessarily need to go straight to the black. I'm going to keep going with this though, and then if I need to then darken off more, I've still got room to do that. So what I'm doing with this one is just kind of mapping out the darkest places within the rocks. And just lost my way a bit there. So easy to lose where you were. So remembering that the shadow area is on the right side of all the rocks, or, you know, where the light's not catching it. So where they're jagged or you've got bits that are sticking up and so forth, then you're going to have shadow on the sides of those pieces as well as big shadows. I just want to come back in here and tidy up this bit. I think this needs to be wider. Yeah, that's what's happened. Okay. And no, stick with the darks. So I'm just going to keep going with my dark for now. Right, it's not dark enough, I feel like. Still, it's going to contribute to creating shadow and things. So it's not all at a loss. It just means I can go a little darker where I want to. It's coming along though. Getting there. Okay. So again, just getting some dark onto the sides of the rocks where it's got shadow. And also, you know, noticing, as I said before, all the bumps and lumps on top of the rocks and around. They're all different shapes. So each little shape has its own light and dark side. Kind of trying to get that to have form and to look like it's got shapes. Okay. Got a bit of dust on there, so I'll tip that off. Right. Now I'm going to pick up my terracotta colour because I want to start getting a few of my lighter tones in now. So we've been talking about darks and mids for the rocks, but now it's time to start looking at some of these light areas, because what that's going to do is kind of highlight the tops and start to give it some form. So I'm just putting this down, and I have a lighter one again. I've got two actually, two lighter ones that I can then carry on with. See how there's beautiful, like a rainbow stripe almost through this rock. All the beautiful colours in there. Okay. I'm just going to put a bit of this colour on some little sections of the tops of the rocks as well to indicate, you know, the lighter sides, and that they all have like a top side as well as an edge, you know, like a flat top almost. So if I use this mid-tone orangey colour to get a bit of that in there, then I can come in with my lights again and highlight some of the lighter parts. So this is definitely not my lightest, and I've got a lot more room to go if I want to put more lights in. But it's a mid and it will contribute to building up the texture. I think I'm missing a rock over there. Yes, I am. Should have put a rock about here, covered that up with water and things before. So I'll put that back in. So you can actually just pop things back in over the top. As long as you don't have too much pastel down on your paper, it's reasonably easy to just place things back in. A few of those things on the sand, that just kind of, these little dashes of rocks or whatever they are, just give it perspective and help to show how far away things are, I guess. Give us some shape and size. So again, back to my orange. So see how the orange, I've been using that just to sort of get the surface or the tops of the rocks to look like they are the tops, basically. Whereas the dark sections are the shadowed sides or the edges or the cliff face kind of side. And then as we move to the lighter colours to highlight the brighter sections, that's really going to start to bring it alive. So for instance, I'm going to pick up this umber colour. Now this will look quite light compared to what else I've used on the rocks. Just in here, see, I've popped a little bit of that there, and I can now see that's starting to look like the sun's catching on the tops of some of those rocks along there. So we can touch that on to the light section. So this is when you've got to start kind of really noticing the shapes and where the light areas are. And I'm going to put more dark in later on to really highlight the dark parts. It's starting to give it some solidity and make it look like it's, you know, solid things. If you've got this on an iPad or something, you can zoom in and see where the brightest parts are. So most of the bright sections will be on the top because the sun's catching them. Now, if you're a realist artist, you might want to do every tiny little section perfect. I'm a little bit haphazard and looser than that. Potentially you could spend a lot more time on this and really get it spot on. It would be amazing if you wanted to. See how the colours or the tones just really start to give it some dimension. So just doing that, putting some of this where all the lighter sections are. And we can go lighter again. So this isn't the lightest, it's just one of the lighter sides that's kind of helping to, you know, give this form. And again, it's just looking at the shapes of the colours. And again, depending on the kind of pastel you've got will depend on how well it will kind of stick over the top of the other ones. If you've got a fairly heavy coat on already, and you've got a harder pastel, you'll find it's probably a bit more tricky to get it to stay on. I'm just doing some of those stripes I can see through there. Kind of cool. when you're doing location things like this, even though I don't know where it is and I will find out, it's nice if people recognise a place. Location is good. People, will have an emotional attachment to a place if they've had a nice time there or have memories or something. And so it's often a good subject to paint if you want to sell your art. So that's starting to get a bit of form now. What I'm going to do next is just going to put a bit of more light in there. So I'm going to try this bright orange, see if that was a little bit much or not. I haven't used it yet. See what that does. Just to maybe warm it up a tiny bit, get a bit of sunshine happening in there. And then I'm going to go back in with some darks or probably a black or something to get my darks nice and dark. First I'm going to use this. This is my sand colour, my Australian grey. So you can see if you squint at your picture, the light areas on the top of the rock here are around about the same colour as the sand. Aren't they? I can see there's a lot of light across there. And I think it literally is just sand sitting on the rocks. Hard to know, really. Although there's a grassy area there. Anyway, we'll put some of that in here because what that will do is make the dark look darker. So it'll emphasize the shadow more and give me some sunshine. Just going to zoom in. Oh, that's a road. Fancy that. It's a road running through. Did you see that? I didn't look closely. That's my problem. Study it. There's actually a little road through here, and there are cars or something on there. I can't get in close enough. There is a road running through there. It looks like it comes to an end, like a dead end, which is like a picnic spot or something here. Interesting. And so on there are little, what might be umbrellas or something. They look like hats. Maybe they're people with sombreros. I don't know. But it all adds to the interest, doesn't it? That's why there's these stripy kind of things going on. Could even be some sort of quarry. I don't know. Anyway, I'll do some research and find out. Yeah. So, like I said before, everything is just a shape. And if you just draw the shapes that you see, it will kind of make sense. Well, it should do. There's also some shadow through here. I'm going to put a bit of purple in here just to indicate shadow between that big rock there and this one. A bit more dark. So don't forget you can mix colours on the paper as you go. So if you can't find a particular colour that you want, sometimes you can just make it. And I like to just try that and see what happens. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't, and you haven't overcommitted and pressed too hard or covered too much of an area, you can go over it and fill it in again. So that's coming along all right. So you can see, you know, just by working with your tones and getting your darks and your lights kind of playing nicely together, putting them where you see them, then it slowly, slowly just starts to make sense and come together. I'm loving the purple in that shadow area. Nice. Just going to put a few more little dark marks down through here to indicate the shape of the rock. It looks kind of stripy. It's almost like a quarry kind of thing. And there's another light bit here. Kind of comes up in a little W sort of shape. Through there. Cool, cool. And a bit dark on that side. So just noticing now all the little bits and pieces that give it some shadow and form. I'm going to grab something darker and really darken up those strong dark areas, because I think that'll really give it some punch. First off though, remember we said there were some trees down in here? I'm just going to do some little, I've got more dark green. This is the green we used in the very beginning in the water. I just want to get a few bits of greenery down through here to indicate the trees. I've just done some little squiggly marks, and if I just gently sort of push them in with my fingers a little. And then you can see some of those trees have a bit of a highlight. Remember the ones I said were taller and they were catching. So I use my purple works because they look a bit purple to me. Yeah. Might need to get a bit of a brighter green, some sort of a grassy green colour, just to add a bit of interest into there, I think. But yeah, I think it's coming together all right. It looks like it should. I've got this nice hill thing going on here. So it looks like you could come up to the top there and then maybe walk down that side into the water, or down here onto this little beach. And my shadow, yeah, I'm going to sharpen up the edges of that. I'm just going to find a green for my trees. I don't want anything too light because I don't want to, you know, pop too much, but I just have a little, this is a mid green. Have a little, just a suggestion of it. That might be enough. I'm better go and get a black too in a minute. And there's a little, can you see that? There's a little V shape of light out there. It's a little bit of rock that must be poking out. I don't know if that's a bit too bright. Brighten it down a tad. So it's quite sharp though, that angle, isn't it? It's a hard line. It doesn't curve. So that's indicating maybe like a rock face there. And then that's where the brighter green trees are, because they sort of seem to be sitting in here. And a bit of sunshine on those guys. So I'm going to just pick up this orangey colour that I had before. And then I can push it in and quieten it down a little bit. So whenever anything's a bit bright, you can just soften it off with your finger and dab it in. Don't mind what that did on the tops of those. I'm going to try that over. There's a couple of other little tree tops just here. Just subtle, tiny, tiny bit. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what we need to do now is just darken off in a couple of areas to get some more depth into the rocks so that it's looking more 3D. And I want to sharpen up this shadow. I might do that now actually. So I'm going to grab my purple. Remember we put that down at the very start for the shadow down here on the sand. And so I just want to put that down a little bit harder here and define the lines a bit more. You'll find if you want to get a sharp line like that and a sharp edge, it's a little bit tricky with pastels because they're so crummy. If you go carefully, so I've put some of that on the edge there, I'm just pulling it in with my finger. I won't get a really sharp line, I don't mind, that's okay. It's quite nice though, isn't it? And then I might kind of darken that off in here towards the slowly just pull that out into the purple. So I've got a nice little gradient shadow there. And there's also all that speckly stuff on the sand there. I'm just using my dark green because it was the darkest one I could put. A few little dots throughout there. Something like that. See how that just gives it distance. So by putting a few trees and things in, we're kind of saying, hey, we're really up high in the sky here, guys. And, you know, looking down, and if that's a tree, then this is how high we are, and it really helps to give the feeling of that. So even a little boat somewhere would do that, would help to do that. See these rocks on in the sand here in the front, this little beachy area. We've got a light and a dark side on those as well. Now, I know they're only little, but if we just put a sort of a lighter stripe on the left-hand side of each one, it might hopefully, yep, there we go, look like it's a solid object rather than just a dot. Often it's as simple as that. It's just a simple little, you know, lighter tone on the light side where the sun would be, or the night. Righty-ho. Okay, that's coming along quite well. The other thing I did was a little bit of a light smoosh just in here. You can see there that bit of sand is catching the light. These tiny details now are the ones that will make things really come alive. So just noticing where the light is in different spots within the rocks in there and putting that in will help to give it life. Cool. So now all we need is a bit more dark, and I might even brighten up that sand in the foreground there because we only put one layer down on that. If I pop some white over that, that's going to really make it jump. So I'll do that now. Then I'll go and get my dark. A bit of white on here. Remember, you can't go whiter than white, so now's the time to be looking for your whites and really highlighting those bright areas. So that will bring the sand up nice and bright. And a little bit on this side too, in here. And then again, you can start to wander around and look at your water. I've just got my schminky in my hand. I know I didn't want to break it, but if I just use the end of it, I can get a few nice, really bright highlights going on. This is the exciting part when it all starts to start shining. Look at all those rocks over there. See how just that little bit of extra white just brightens it up a tiny bit more. then when we put, didn't put a rock in there, I forgot that one. Oops. Then we'll put some black or dark blue or something dark in the darkest spots, and it should hopefully be just about done. Yeah, okay. Oh, I'm going to push this white in. I'm going to clean my finger off first. Push that into the sand. Just softly, softly, so we've got it kind of brighter there. A little bit in here. When you push it in, it goes a bit duller and sort of muted, I suppose. So you could keep adding layers and getting it brighter, and if you have some fixative you could give it a spray so you can get more pastel to stick to the, I just put a bit of Australian grey, sorry, I forgot to say, on this sand or rock face here, this smooth rock, just to give it some form. Just makes it a bit more interesting. It also, the other thing it does is add a bit of light to this end of it, so that's telling me the sun's catching there too, which is nice. All right, I'm going to get it dark, 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 dark. So I've got a dark blue and I've got a black. I'm going to try the dark blue first. If that's not black enough, then I'll go to black. This is pretty dark, and I think it'll be quite lovely. So what I want to do is darken off in here. See down in there, it's really black. Get some of that in there, and that will then start to give me some more depth. Ah, yes, that's better. Good. So sometimes you just got to go something a bit darker to get the contrast happening. And then I can pop some of that down in here too, around these trees in the base, because that's also really dark down in there. See how by making the dark darker, it just makes the lights pop more. And the blue's quite nice, it's a bit warmer than black. Better. And out onto here, it needs to be some dark in there too. Just checking the dark bits. This one, so they all need a little bit more dark on the right side, just in between the tops and the middle warriors. So more form in there. And these ones over here, a bit more dark down through there. Remembering the sun's on the left, so it's got to be darker on the right. Good. Remembering too that there are also dark sections on the top where all the, you know, there's shorter and taller rocks and bumpy bits and so forth. So looking for that as well. It's darker over here on the right hand side, that funny little W shape there. And then we've got these rocks, all these loose kind of rocks just on the far right there on the edge. I'm just going to do some little dark marks to give those some shadow, and then we can pop some little light spots in as well, and that'll do for that. And the good thing is, if I do need to go darker, I still can. You know, there's always black if you want to go darker still. But I think this is fine. I think this will be good. Blue's nice. Kind of, and then it ties in with, you know, the overall colour scheme as well, because we've got a lot of blue and green in there. Okay, so I'm just going to give my hands a little wipe, and then I'm going to pick up my umber and just put some highlights on these little rocks over here on the right. Remember, we just put some darks in there. So if I put a few little light spots here and there, hopefully that'll start to look like a bunch of rocks. All sitting there together. A few more little highlights in some of the other areas of the rocks that might have, you know, got pushed away or blended in too much. And it's highlighting this. I feel like this rock needs to be a bit lighter. This main one, need more light in there, maybe. So there we go. I think that's looking all right. We could fiddle a little bit more, pop a bit more light onto these rocks. Maybe little bits of orange here and there to catch the light warming up a bit. The secret is to try to keep it as natural looking as you can. Not like that. Oops, I just picked up black then. Put that away so I can't reach it. This is my dark blue back. Darkening up a few more spots. Yeah, I think we're just about done, ladies and gentlemen, if there's any gentlemen coming. Good. And, you know, if you wanted to add some more highlights for your waves, or brighten something else up, just thinking up here, here needs to be brighter, because the sun would be catching there because it's kind of rolling down the hill a little bit. That makes sense. Yeah. Cool. And then come around through there. And as I said, I don't know what those dots are, whether they're umbrellas or cars or something, but you can pop them in if you wanted to. Just again to give a feeling of distance and perspective. We can touch up our trees a little bit more. I love doing trees, so we want to spend a bit more time in there. A bit more orange on the tops. And I lost that bit there, so put that back in. So you can fiddle around and just refine everything and get everything just how you like it. Good-o. All right, we might flick over to the other screen in a moment and have a look and see how you went. So I haven't painted that one before, so that was fun. Just going to do a photo. Interesting, isn't it, doing it from aerial perspective and trying to get everything kind of looking like it's in perspective and got form, etc. All right. If you're watching this video, thank you for joining me, and I hope you've enjoyed doing this one. Great little practice run and inspiration to do lots more of these. So I think it's my new favourite thing to paint, these aerial views. So thanks for coming, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.